Yeah, exactly. Which
And
is energy, which is amazing for how fundamental it is to our society and way of life. Is a very poorly understood concept, actually. Just even energy itself. People confuse energy sources with energy storage, with energy transmission. These are different physical phenomena, which are very important. So, for example, you buy an electric car and you go, oh, good, I have an emission-free car. And but it's like, so what? Why do you say that? Well, it's because if I draw the circle around the car, I have electricity and it doesn't emit anything. Okay, but you plug that into a grid where you follow that wire back, there could be a coal power plant or a gas power plant at the end of that. Oh, really? You mean so this isn't like carbon free? Oh, and it's not their fault. It's just, they don't, like, the car isn't a source of energy. The underlying source of energy was the combustion of the fuel back somewhere.
plus, there's also a story of how the raw materials are mined
Yeah.
in which parts of the world, with sort of basic respect or deep disrespect of human rights that happens in that mining. So the whole supply chain, there's a story there that's deeper than just a particular electric car with a circle around it.
And the physics or the science of it too is the energy use that it takes to do that digging up, which is also important and all that. Yeah. Anyway, so
Yeah.
we wandered away from fusion, but yes,
Oh, it's a beautiful stroll.
but it's very important actually in the context of this, just because those of us who work in fusion and these other kinds of sort of disruptive energy technologies, it's interesting. I do think about, like, what is it going to mean to society to have an energy source that is like this, that would be like fusion, which has such completely different characteristics. For example, free unlimited access to the fuel, but it has technology implications. So what does this mean geopolitically? What does it mean for how we distribute wealth within our society? It's very difficult to know, but probably profound. Yeah.
We're gonna have to find another reason to start wars. Instead of resources, we're gonna have to figure something.
We've done a pretty good job of that over the course of our histories. Yeah.
So we talked about the forces of physics, and again, sticking to the philosophical before we get to the specific technical stuff. E equals mc squared. You mentioned. How amazing is that to you? That energy and mass are the same. Yeah. And what does that have to do with nuclear fusion?
So it has to do with everything we do. It's the fact that energy and mass are equivalent to each other. They're just, the way we usually comment to it is that they're just energy, just in different forms.
Can you intuitively understand that?
Yes, but it takes a long time. I haven't for a while, but usually, often I teach the introductory class for incoming nuclear engineers, and so we put this up as an equation, and we go through many iterations of using this. To how you derive it, how you use it, and so forth. And then usually in the final exam, I would basically take all the equations that I've used before and I flip it around. I basically, instead of thinking about energy is equal to mass, it's sort of mass is equal to energy. And I ask the question in a different way, and usually about half the students don't get it. It takes a while to get that intuition. Yeah. So in the end, it's interesting is that this is actually the source of all free energy, because that energy that we're talking about is kinetic energy if it can be transformed from mass. So it turns out even though we used equals mc squared, this was burning coal and burning gas and burning wood is actually still equals mc squared. The problem is that you would never know this because the relative change in the mass is incredibly small. By the way, which comes back to fusion, which is that E equals mc squared. Okay, so what does this mean? It tells you that the amount of energy that is liberated in a particular reaction when you change mass has to do, because c squared that's the speed of light squared.
It's a large number.
It's a very large number, and it's totally constant everywhere in the universe, which is
another weird thing.
Which is another weird thing, and in all rest frames, and actually the relativity stuff gets more difficult conceptually until you get through it. Anyway, so you go to that, and what that tells you is that it's the relative change in the mass will tell you about the relative amount of energy that's liberated. And this is what makes fusion, and you asked about fission as well too, this is what makes them extraordinary. It's because the relative change in the mass is very large as compared to what you get like in a chemical reaction. In fact, it's about 10 million times larger. And that is at the heart of why you use something like fusion. It's because that is a fundamental of nature. Like you can't beat that. So of whatever you do, if you're thinking about, and why do I care about this? Well, because mass is like the fuel, right? So this means gathering the resources that it takes to gather a fuel, to hold it together, to deal with it, the environmental impact it would have. And fusion will always have 20 million times the amount of energy release per reaction that you could have those. So this is why, we consider it the ultimate like environmentally friendly energy source, is because of that.
So is it correct to think of mass broadly as a kind of storage of energy?
Yes.
You mentioned it's environmentally friendly. So nuclear fusion is a source of energy. It's cheap, clean, safe. So easy access to fuel and virtually unlimited supply, no production of greenhouse gases, little radioactive waste produced, allegedly. Can you sort of elaborate why it's cheap, clean, and safe?
I'll start with the easiest one, cheap. It is not cheap yet because it hasn't been made at a commercial scale.
Time flies when you're having fun. But yes.
Yeah.
But yes, not yet.
But
we'll talk about
actually, we'll come back to that because this is cheap, or a more technically correct term, that it's economically interesting is really the primary challenge actually of fusion at this point. But I think we can get back to that. So what were the other ones you said?
So cheap. We're actually, when we're talking about cheap, we're thinking like asymptotically. Like if you take it forward several hundred years, that's sort of because of how much availability there is of resources to use
of the fuel.
Yeah, of the fuel.
We should separate those two. The fuel is already cheap. It's basically free, right? Yeah. And what do you mean by basically free? So if we were to be using fusion fuel sources to power and it's like that's all we had was fusion power plants around, and we were doing it, the fuel cost per person or something like 10 cents a year. It's like it's free. Okay. This is why it's hard to, in some ways, I think it's hard to understand fusion, because people see this and go, oh, if the fuel is free, this means the energy source is free, because we're used to energy sources like this. So we spend resources and drill to get gas or oil, or we chop wood, or we make coal, we find coal, or these things. All right. So fusion, this is what makes fusion. And it's also, it's not an intermittent renewable energy source like wind and solar. So it's like, but this makes it hard to understand. So if you're saying the fuel is free, why isn't the energy source free? And it's because of the necessary technologies which must be applied to